and welcome to Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to conversations with people who want to grow and spread empathy throughout the world.
Today, I'm joined by the fabulous Dr. Lidewij Niezink. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So, Lidewij is an independent empathy scholar and practitioner, and she focuses on the development of the theory and the practice of empathy, integrating practice-based experiential methods with fundamental and applied research. Together with Dr. Catherine Train, she co-founded Empathic Intervision, an embodied practice of empathy for people working together to identify opportunities and co-create solutions to challenges. So this is like a very exciting thing that you're working on, but there's a lot to unpack there because there's a lot of very nuanced terms that I want to understand better. So let's start with the very simple thing of what is integrated empathy to you?
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Yeah, so, I've been working on empathy for almost 20 years now. I started doing my master's and then my PhD. And then, at some point, I really felt like, okay, this theory of empathy is interesting. So I come from a social psychological perspective. The theory of empathy is interesting, but I really felt like I need to be doing something in the world with this. So, it's all nice, this talk, but how do we walk it? And so I got really interested in the very, very varied scientific approaches to empathy, right? So we have psychology, we have philosophy, neuroscience. Those are the ones that are quite well known. But we also have theater and the arts, anthropology, and and literature. And there's so many different disciplines who have a long tradition of working on empathy. And we have then the world of medicine, which is completely different again from what we're doing in psychology. So I got really fascinated by all of that. And I got also fascinated by more contemplative traditions. So the Buddhist tradition, the Hindu traditions, they also have a long history of empathy or compassion. And I'm not saying it's the same thing, we can talk about that later, but about a history of trying to understand the other person and holding space for the other person. And so my mission, if you will, became to integrate all these perspectives. I think our field really needs integration of perspectives at the moment. There's too much little islands with people defining empathy this way or that way or that way. And within our field, within the scholar field of empathy, it's already a big problem. But out there in the real world, where you and I live, right, where we're trying to do something with all of this, it's just a mess. It's really a mess. And I think that's on us. That's because we have this way of sitting on I define it this way. This is how it is, or I can't be bothered to define it. I just have an opinion about it, which is also what's happening a lot around empathy, I think. So that's what I try to do. I try to integrate. And so integrative empathy is, I define 5 empathy skills. Together with Catherine, my colleague, we're working on 5 empathy skills, which we call integrative empathy. And I'm happy to tell you a bit more about it. But the overall thing around empathy, if people ask me, so how do you define empathy? I always say, there's nothing new under the sun with what we do, right? There's a lot known about this and from many, many different disciplines. And it's really fascinating to just learn about that and to empathize with all these different ways of looking at it and to try and find a way to combine it. So the overall definition that I'd work with of empathy is about holding space for another person or other people to be as they are, to express themselves as they are without passing judgment, without interfering, without just holding a space.
Wow, that's beautiful. So, I'm starting with a really big question here, but why do you think that work is so important in today's world?
Well, I think, so there's 2 things. There's several things. But so when I started my work on empathy, there was a relatively small amount of people working on empathy, right? It was really, and most people knew each other, at least within the academic world. Most people knew each other. There had been a history of work on empathy for, well, since 1850, 1870, really, in Europe, then in the United States. Then, so that you're asking me why it's so important, right? So at that time, there was just no knowledge of empathy. There was some knowledge, but very little. And when I was training, like I was training firefighters, and I asked, "What is empathy?" And they were, "Empathy, really, you know." And that was great. It was also difficult because you had to really come with, okay, why are we doing this? Why would we want to understand another person? Why would we want to hold space for another person, right? Well, I think nowadays everybody knows about empathy in one way or another, or has an opinion about empathy. And I think it's maybe even more important than when we didn't know about it yet. I think it's one of the ways to really help to tolerate each other in a very polarized world. We live in this world where everybody is out there, everybody has opinions, everybody is speaking, and there's so little understanding and willingness to listen to each other, and willingness to live beside somebody else who has a different view of life than you have. So I think in terms of that, I think empathy is just a fantastic tool to master and to help us to regain a sense of respect for otherness, right? We don't all want to be the same, do we? I mean, boring.
Yeah. But it's interesting because you provided that historical lens that, you know, there were a few scholars that knew each other studying empathy, but as the field of empathy studies has grown, especially across the different disciplines, and there's little camps having, you know, some arguments. One of the little camps is the case against empathy. There's even books written called Against Empathy. And so I want to ask you a question, whether or not you see any limitations to empathy as well. So, you know, if everyone was empathic with everyone else all the time, is that sustainable? Is that a good thing? If not, why not?
I don't see the point. I don't see the point of being empathic all the time. I also think it's impossible, right? So when I try to empathize, when I try to hold that space, it takes inner resources, right? I need to put something aside. I need to open myself up. I need to be able to hold that space for somebody else. If I'd be doing that 24/7, I wouldn't have any private life anymore. I wouldn't have any battery charger. I wouldn't be able to recharge. I wouldn't know myself. I wouldn't be with myself. I would always be with others. So I think it's a bad idea to empathize all the time. But for this case against empathy, I think that has to do with empathy being either confused with things like emotional contagion, which happens a lot, right? So we are taking on the emotions of other people, and that is a bad informant for whatever action's coming next. And I think that's true. And so if you call that empathy, then I agree with you. There's a case against empathy. I just don't think that is empathy, right? For me, empathy is really it's a neutral thing. It's not morally charged. It's not morality. Empathy is not good in the sense that it helps us to be morally better people. Empathy is a competency to me. So it's a skill. It's something that you practice, right? And something just like mathematics. I mean, you don't want to do mathematics 24/7 either, right? You don't want to. So when you empathize, you work on that skill, and then you stop empathizing to regroup and to regain your own sense of self. It's an outward movement, right? Empathy. So you also need that movement back inward, I'd say.
So with that baseline of viewing empathy as a competency that you can build and develop over time, I'd really, really love for you to talk about your practice of empathic intervision. What does that look like?
Yeah. So Catherine and I started working together about 6 years ago where we had a project in South Africa with a big NGO working in the field of cancer research and treatment. And so the service delivery staff there, working there, had nothing in place to no supervision, no peer support, nothing. And so we built Empathic Intervision as a peer support practice with them. So that was the start of our work. What we do in Empathic Intervision is we define 5 different empathy skills that you can use either in a sequence through a whole Empathic Intervision to problem solve, to negotiate conflicts, to peer learn, to peer support, so all these group level processes, strategic decision making, you can use it overall. But you can also use the skills individually for different type of purposes. So for me, empathy is always, it's a means to an end. That's how we define empathy. And so these 5 skills, we always start with self-empathy. Self-empathy is actually very interesting because self-empathy is something that, when we started writing on this about 1.5 years ago, we were going into the literature trying to find, okay, what's known about self-empathy in the literature? And there was hardly anything. In psychotherapy, there's some literature on self-empathy, but there's very little literature on self-empathy. And it's very often confounded with self-compassion. Mm-hmm. Self-compassion is this care for oneself, right? You observe yourself, you find whatever is there, and you bring kindness to it. That's the movement in compassion. And for us, self-empathy is much more neutral than that. Self-empathy is about, if you can't observe what you bring to the table, if you can't observe where you are at the moment, how you feel, how you express yourself, whether you're nervous, whether you're angry, whether you're distracted because you've got all these other things in your mind. If you can't observe that before you empathize with somebody else, you're set up for disaster, right? Which is either projection of yourself on the other. No, go ahead.
I didn't want to cut you off. I did. Yeah. I had a big impulse. So I really appreciate the distinction between self-compassion and self-empathy. But then my follow-up is, how is that different from self-awareness?
Yeah. So I think the self-awareness and all the mindfulness techniques and all that is closer to self-empathy than self-compassion, right? Mm-hmm. So it is about a self-awareness. But self-empathy is not only the awareness. It's also the ability to do something with that opens you up to the other person. Right. Okay. So there is something in there, and we have different practices to actually do that, right? To make sure that what you discover about yourself in your self-awareness, to be able to work with that in order to be able to hold the space for somebody else.
Brilliant. Now, I have a feeling you're going to share on a conceptual level all 5 with our listeners and viewers, which would be great. But can I also then give them the sense of satisfaction to look forward to an example of maybe like something that you facilitated or with a group where you saw something special emerge from the practice? Maybe you could take it to an anecdotal place, for us to savor.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I'm not sure if I can take you through, because it's an overall thing, but I do have one example in mind of a woman that we were training, a woman in the group, right, in her own team, who was that person she was very dedicated to her work. She spent a lot of time with cancer patients, right? She was very dedicated to taking care of others. And she had a burden because of it, right? Because in South Africa, when you work in that type of circumstances, you're working with people who really can be really in very miserable circumstances, whether drug abuse, alcohol abuse, family not appreciating your sickness, your illness, telling you, go to work, what are you bothering with? This is nothing. So very burdened, right? And then she was in this team where there were lots of people who had a lot to say. We all know these circumstances, right? You're in a team and you're the one who's a bit more shy, a bit more introverted, who are not the first in the forefront of doing all that, doing all the speaking, right? So an empathic intervision helps for everybody to have their own space. And so the one thing that just comes to mind with her is, so we did self-empathy, then we did kinesthetic empathy. Let me explain that, because it's the kinesthetic empathy is, so our empathy practice is a very embodied practice. We really believe that empathy is not just that, right? And so all the division that we have at the moment of cognitive and emotional empathy, I think is really shame. I really believe that it's not doing justice to all that empathy is. For me, empathy is not action, right? So all the action part I take off, but cognitive and emotional is just what fMRI scans can be measuring at the moment. There's more to empathy than cognitive and emotional. For instance, embodied. So kinesthetic empathy comes out of dance and theater and the arts and how do we synchronize our bodies, right? So in kinesthetic empathy, we make people move together, we make people mirror together. The whole mirror neuron system is one of the bases of that type of practice. So we're really into, okay, out of the cognitive level, how do you empathize with somebody else on a bodily experience level? That's what we do with kinesthetic empathy. So we had her stand up and we had her express herself and we had the group simulate, mirror her movements, right? Up till the point where she felt seen. Okay, that was a thing, right? Because when you're shy and you have to be there in the center of the attention, right? And then you see everybody doing the same thing as you, it's quite a thing. But she enjoyed it. She enjoyed it because she was seen. And it's a nice thing to be seen. Then the third level, and that's something I think you are much more familiar with because I worked a lot with Edwin Rudge on this, is the reflective empathy. So the reflective listening comes out of the humanistic approaches to empathy, and specifically Carl Rogers and the whole, that approach. So listen to somebody else, reflect back what you hear, without interfering, without judging, without questioning, without anything, just reflecting back. She got to speak within her team about the troubles that she was noticing and about what was happening in the team and about the difficulty that she had with it. And instead of having the responses of her colleagues only could reflect back what she was saying. So she had the possibility to say it, and she had the feeling of being heard about it. That happened. That was a thing.
So I'm imagining, and I know you're still going to get to 4 and 5, but I imagine that there are a lot of different kinds of organizations that could benefit from this for a lot of different reasons. So, for example, you mentioned healthcare, but the idea of, a team of healthcare providers doing this practice provides openings to reflect on the work and how they collaborate differently and how they problem solve differently. So there'd be an application there. Same thing with teachers, same things with, a group of bureaucrats. But then I also imagine in the private sector, I've done a lot of reading around teams that have good social capital. When the trust is embedded in the relationship and there's a sense of proximity that sort of transcends the colleague to colleague relationship, turns out that they're more productive, the capacity for innovation opens up, the retention. Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of bottom line metrics that organizations say, hey, this makes sense to do. It's not just woo-woo kumbayaing, but there's actual real value in that. Could you speak to that just for a second?
Absolutely. I think the whole woo-woo kumbaya, I hope that we're now, 2020 will be the year where we get past empathy as the touchy-feely. I think it's really time we leave that behind and we get into, look, this is a skill. You need to work it. And once you work it, you get better at it. And then you can reap the benefits of it. And as you said, I think one of the benefits, what I really like about empathy, and which is also what I always have to explain when we compare it with compassion, is empathy is not, by definition, suffering focused. And that's important for the private sector to understand that we're not all about the misery in empathy. We're about understanding each other, being able to learn from each other, being able to be more creative, making sure that things like groupthink don't happen, right? Groupthink, the whole group starts, oh yeah, I agree, oh yeah, me too. And we get less and less creative because we're all agreeing with each other all the time. That's not what empathy is about. It's not about having to agree with each other. If you do, that's fine. But if you don't, that's fine too. And I think that's really what is interesting about empathy as a competency, is that you get to build that, and that you really get to, within professional contexts where you have to trust each other and you have to be able to disagree with each other, you need an ability to hold space for that. That is not something that happens automatically. I think that's where empathy really steps in. Yeah, so you can have the trust because you were heard. They heard you. You could say your thing. You could participate in the overall thing. You could be more creative. So the 4-stage imaginative empathy, that's more towards the cognitive part of it, right? But again, we practice it in a very embodied way. So how do you step into the perspective of another person? And then making sure that you understand the difference between perspective taking as an imagined self perspective, how would I feel in the shoes of the other person, versus how does the other person feel in their own shoes, right? Or what do they experience in their own shoes? And this, so empathy as a walking a mile in another person's shoes, yes, nice, great exercise, right? But you need self-empathy because you need to be aware of who are you and who's the other person. What do you need in those shoes? What does the other person need in those shoes? So there's a lot of skill involved, really, and there's a lot of, as you say in the beginning, like, yes, I use a lot of subtle words because there's so much behind it, right? It's not just, oh yeah, you just empathize and you'll be fine. It's, you can tell that the whole world. All you need is empathy. Yeah, but how? How do we do that, right? That's really what it's about.
So it's really about the practice. It's really about the practice. So I think you wanted to share the two final parts of
so the imaginative empathy is this embodied way of stepping into other people's shoes, right? And then stepping out again and looking at that and having this constant, okay, so how are they in their shoes, right? That's what the imaginative empathy is all about. And the last, and definitely not the least, so thank you for giving me a chance to mention it, is what we call the empathic creativity. And so empathic creativity is about when you empathize with other people through all these different practices, things happen, right? Things shift. There's moments where you really understand each other, or there's moments where you really notice, no, wait, this is not, we have to find a way to deal with this because I can't agree with that. All these things, taking that into actionable outcomes. That's what the empathic creativity is about. So always having this way of where was the energy, whether it's positive, whether it's loaded, whether it's difficult, where was the energy? What do we have to work with? How can we do that practically? How do we take that forward? That's the last stage. So maybe I finish because, I started this story. So that happened with this woman, right? And that was really, for us, that was such a gift. That at the end of all of the practice of the empathic intervision, she was there at the end and she was so happy. And so in this empathic action, she said, I really learned that I have a role in this team and I need to speak up. And actually, I can speak up and people will listen to me if we have practices in place for people like me to be heard as well. And so, so we could really get into, okay, how are we going to facilitate this for this woman in this team? Because the whole team was like, very useful information. Shame we never listened to you before, right? This type of, so that's, for me, that was fantastic happening.
So she found her agency, and it also revealed to the team that she could bring so much value that was unlocked before. So that's beautiful. But I imagine the on-ramp to do some programming with you requires a cultural openness and leadership being open to the idea of sort of a flattening of the hierarchy of power. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's interesting. So that's when we introduce empathic intervision within organizations, we always say that in an intervision, that's why it's called intervision, not supervision. In an intervision, within this process, there is no hierarchy. You're not there in your function of director. You're welcome there in your function of director, but you need to understand that the function of whatever, the coffee seller, the consultant, the cleaner, everybody who is part of that process is at that same hierarchical, non-hierarchical, flat level with each other. And so when we work with teams and we have managers in the teams wanting to do this with their teams, we speak with them about, make sure that your position within this team is not the one of the manager who controls this whole process. And so the other thing we do in empathic intervisions is we create with safety contracts these things at the beginning of a session. And we're working with intentions to make sure that everybody is at the same point, that they have the same goals for the intervision. And we safety contract, and when this contract gets breached, which happens, of course, because when you're the manager and you're used to giving orders, so that can happen, then we re-contract these things. We make sure that we understand, oh, wait, here, we're out of line here. This is not what we're trying to do. Does that answer your question?
Totally. So I have a quick follow-up, and then I have a final question, and thank you so much for your time. This has been fascinating. I've absolutely adored this conversation. The quick question is, how long does that take? What's the typical empathic intervision process?
Yeah, so if you want to do a full empathic intervision and you want to take your time for it, 90 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that could actually be done quite.
Yeah.
Compact.
I know, I took forever, but it doesn't take a whole day.
Oh, wow. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
So then the bigger question is, I can so see this happening within sort of like departments, units, teams. I wonder what its application could be for some of the big, hairy, complex problems like working on climate change and resolving, the many issues that would be involved in that, or anti-racist work, or how are we going to deal with the global pandemic? So when you talk about solving social problems, where do you envision this having a place, and how would that work and look like?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I love your purpose, eh? No, it's great. Yeah, so I think what this does, again, it can't be a panacea for all, right? If it would be that, then it's, then in a few years, everybody's going to do this and all going to love and peace in this world. I'm not sure that's going to happen. But I do think that, and in these, what this is useful for in these bigger contexts is to really get people together, right? Who have decision powers around things, right? Like in Europe, when you have the climate problem and how we're going to structure the budget around climate change and around becoming more of a sustainable economy, right? I can very much imagine that if you take the time to do this within that type of setting, right? But that's on a strategic level. I think you want to be doing this so that you draw out all these perspectives. You really get an understanding of them. You have them all clear, right? Then what happens is the decision making around that, and that there's a lot of different players at play in the decision making, right? All the lobbying and all that. There's so much happening there in that decision making itself. So drawing it out and setting the agenda, I think it would be great there, right? In the decision making itself, you have to go in smaller groups, and you would have to redo it again and again and again in order to keep on hearing all the voices and to keep on having the creativity to make diverse choices and not just go for there's the money or whatever the reason why we do what we do, right? So it's not, I don't see it as a panacea for all. I do think that what it requests of us is an investment in terms of time, right? And also an investment in terms of willingness to open up. And I think that willingness to open up, that's maybe one of our biggest problems at the moment. What do you think about that? I get that feeling that all our movement is inward, right? It's protective, or it's, yeah. What's your feeling about that?
My sense is that the system that we are generally governed by and guided by is a market economy that has gone way off the cliff in very neoliberal tendencies, very extractive, very exploitative capitalism. And as a result of that, we're kind of swimming as fish in water where we can't imagine a different, like an alternative. The only alternative we're given is like communism or, it's treated as binary. We, as Dr. Yunus says, science fiction, if you read the science fiction novels, they always imagine something that's not possible, and then engineering and science catches up because we actually have the vision of what could be. And he says we need more social fiction. And what would the world look like if we had zero poverty? What would the world look like with zero carbon emissions in the world, right? And so so many people would say that's completely naive, that's crazy, but the track that we're on is by fact unsustainable. So if we want to survive as a species and thrive, we have got to evolve to something other than what the current system is. And so I believe that when you think about our nature as human beings, the narrative that always comes forward is this competitive, greedy, selfish by nature. And, your fellow Dutch Frans de Waal has a lot to say about the chimpanzee versus bonobo story. And then recently I've just bought and started reading, I think I'm in the 3rd chapter of another Dutch thinker who wrote Humankind, talking about, at the end of the day, we're just good, kind people. We're not terrible and mean and full of malice. And so I think part of the solution is that we have got to let go of the narrative that we're swimming in about our culture and go profoundly into what really does bring our life purpose, what really does make us fundamentally happy. Like, if you'll indulge just for a second, on Monday with my class, it's the end of the semester, right? There's 3 weeks of class left. Everybody's got final exams coming and big group projects coming. And I can always sense that the anxiety in the class is peaking. And so we do a little practice of a gratitude exercise where I go around and every student, so now it's on Zoom, right? So that's why I'm doing this visual. So I call on each student and I say, okay, just tell me in one sentence, what are you grateful for? And before we do this, I ask them to do very much in terms of embodied practices. Just do a check. How's your body feeling? Where are your thoughts right now? Is your mind spinning? And try to find a word or a sentence that captures how you're feeling in your body. So then we do this gratitude thing where every student talks about what they're grateful for. And I swear to you, it has never happened that somebody has said, I'm grateful for my iPhone 7, or some entity that they bought in a store. They were grateful for their health. They're grateful for the weather. They're grateful for their friends. They're grateful for their family. And so at the end of it, we do a body scan. How are you feeling? And you just see it on the screen. People are smiling because we've just savored in positive psychology a space of gratitude. We've just held a space of gratitude. And I tell them that our brains cannot actually be in a state of anxiety simultaneously with gratitude. So if you are feeling anxious, go to a place of gratitude and you can take your brain and your body and your whole physiology to a new place. I feel on an aggregate level, we need to provide more space and practice and make it like an exciting, sexy thing to feel satisfied with less material and more like significant, deep stuff that we are actually naturally born to care about. And that's the big heavy lifting, I think, that I think would help. So,
but when I listen to you, I hear, so there's this worldly, the worldly problem and the worldly solutions to it, and the we, right? And there's the I, right? So when you have to get out of the we impossibilities, you move your students to a place of me and my gratitude, right? And I think that's actually really key. That's also why we're so insisting on this self-empathy. I think that the work is an individual work. And it's not like, oh yeah, but me and just me and I'm just, no, that's not how we are all interdependent, right? Frans de Waal, he has a lot of that. And when you look at cooperation in nature, ants, bees, it's amazing. It's all interdependent. We are the same. We are interdependent, right? But the work is our work. So we really need to again come back to how am I in this world? How do I want to be in this world, in this specific interaction with you, but also in my next interaction with the next person? And so coming back to, you can't be empathic 24/7, take the time and get out of that social. You don't have to be social all the time. But when you are social, it takes not only you, it also takes the other person. So that's where the empathy really can do a thing, right? Can have a purpose. I'm
going to just mention to anybody who's listening or watching that we're going to have information about how they can reach out to you if they're interested in exploring this empathic intervision with you. But I also, as a final note, I know that you train the trainer, right? You also offer the opportunity to train people to do this work. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So we work with groups, but we now have a train the trainer program where and it's also online because COVID happened. And so we also, because Catherine and we work online already since the beginning. She's in South Africa, I'm in France. So we've been working online, but we did a lot of physical training. Now the train the trainer program is online. It's a 6 weeks, 3-hour program, and then a 1 year, 1 month, a monthly follow-up where you just do your own practice and you really get into it so that you become a facilitator of that process. We have all sorts of training. So I'll put the website and LinkedIn and you'll find us all over the place. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for spending this time with me, Lidewij. It was really, really lovely to learn more about your work.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.